I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine of my old sedan rumbled to life. The night was crisp and cool, and I could see my breath in the air as I exhaled. The dashboard clock read 11:57 p.m. I had a long drive ahead, heading to my parents' house in the countryside for a surprise visit. The rural roads were usually deserted at this hour, which I found both comforting and eerie. I pulled out of my driveway and onto the main road, the streetlights quickly giving way to darkness as I left the city limits. The only light came from my headlights, cutting through the inky blackness. I turned on the radio, hoping for some company on the lonely road. Static hissed through the speakers before settling on a soft, haunting melody that seemed to fit the night perfectly. As I drove further, the trees on either side of the road grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to form a tunnel of shadows. I kept my eyes on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the woods. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but all I saw was darkness. Suddenly, my car's radio cut out, replaced by an odd crackling sound. I reached out to adjust the dial, but before I could touch it, the crackling stopped, and a voice came through, clear and calm. "You're not alone." I jerked my hand back, my heart pounding. I tried to convince myself it was just some late-night radio show playing a prank, but the voice had sounded so real. I glanced at the radio, but it was off, its display blank. I shook my head and focused on the road. The night seemed to grow darker, the trees on either side appearing more sinister. My headlights caught a glimpse of something on the side of the road, a figure standing still. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching as I came to a halt. The figure was gone. I stared into the darkness, my breath quickening. Had I imagined it? I put the car in gear and slowly drove forward, my eyes scanning the roadside. After a few minutes, I saw it again. A figure in the distance, standing in the middle of the road. As I got closer, I realized it was a woman in a long, flowing dress, her hair cascading down her shoulders. She didn't move as I approached, her eyes fixed on mine. I stopped the car a few feet away from her, unsure of what to do. She looked lost, almost ethereal in the glow of my headlights. I rolled down the window and called out, "Do you need help?" She didn't respond, just stood there, staring. A chill ran down my spine. Something about her didn't seem right. Her eyes were empty, devoid of any emotion. I reached for my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. I cursed under my breath and looked back at the woman. She was gone. I looked around frantically, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. I took a deep breath and decided to keep driving. As I started to move forward, I felt a sudden weight on the car, as if someone had climbed onto the roof. I froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The car shook slightly, and I heard the sound of footsteps above me, slow and deliberate. My mind raced. I had to get out of there. I floored the gas pedal, the car lurching forward. The weight on the roof disappeared, and the footsteps stopped. I drove as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the lights of a small gas station up ahead. I pulled in, my hands trembling as I parked the car. I got out and looked around, but the night was still and silent. I went inside the gas station, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The clerk looked up from his magazine and gave me a nod. "Late night drive." I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. Yeah, just needed to stretch my legs. I forced a smile and bought a cup of coffee, hoping it would calm my nerves. As I left the gas station, I glanced at my car. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move inside, but when I blinked, it was gone. I got back into the car, my hands still shaking. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. The drive to my parents' house was still a long one, but I felt a renewed sense of urgency to get there. As I pulled out of the gas station and back onto the dark, deserted road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. I kept driving, hoping that whatever it was, it would stay in the darkness and leave me alone. But deep down, I knew the night was far from over. The clock on the dashboard read 10:48 p.m. as I adjusted the seatbelt and took a sip of my lukewarm coffee. My name's Dave, and I'm a long-haul truck driver. I've been on the road for the better part of 20 years, and tonight's route was a familiar one, hauling a container from Asheville to Brenton, a solid 6-hour drive through winding country roads and empty highways. Driving at night had always been my preference. Fewer cars, less hassle, and a sort of peaceful solitude that daylight couldn't provide. I checked the gauges, ensuring everything was in order, then shifted the truck into gear. The massive vehicle responded with a deep rumble, and I eased it out of the depot onto the main road. The night was cool and clear, the full moon casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. As I left the city limits, the streetlights faded away, replaced by the darkness of the open road. The miles ticked by, the hum of the engine and the tires on the asphalt a comforting white noise. I kept the radio low, a classic rock station playing softly, just enough to keep me company. The road stretched out ahead, a seemingly endless ribbon of black, bordered by dense woods and occasional open fields. About an hour into the drive, I noticed a faint glow in the rearview mirror. Headlights. A quick glance told me it was another vehicle, but it was hanging back, maintaining a steady distance. I shrugged it off. Other night travelers weren't uncommon, though most preferred to pass a slow-moving truck like mine. The road twisted and turned, and the truck behind me stayed put, never coming closer, never falling back. It was a bit odd, but not enough to concern me. I took another sip of coffee and focused on the road ahead. As I approached a particularly sharp curve, I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The headlights had vanished. I frowned, checking the side mirrors, but there was no sign of the vehicle. Strange, but maybe they had turned off or pulled over. I dismissed it and continued on. The next stretch of road was a long, straight expanse flanked by thick forest on either side. My eyes began to feel heavy, the monotony of the drive lulling me into a near trance. I rolled down the window, letting the brisk night air wake me up. That's when I saw them again, the same headlights, suddenly back, closer this time, but still keeping a steady distance. A sense of unease settled over me. This wasn't normal. I decided to test it. I pressed down on the accelerator, speeding up slightly. The headlights matched my pace. I slowed down, and so did they. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't a coincidence. I flicked on the CB radio, hoping to catch any chatter from other drivers in the area, but the airwaves were silent. The only sound was the crackle of static. I took a deep breath and tried to focus. Maybe it was just another trucker playing games to pass the time. It wouldn't be the first time. As I reached the next town, a small, almost deserted place called Cedar Creek, I decided to pull into a gas station. It was well lit, and I figured it would be a good place to take a break and see if the car would keep following. I signaled and turned into the parking lot, my eyes on the rearview mirror. The car slowed down but continued past the gas station, its headlights disappearing around a bend. Relieved, I parked the truck and stepped out, stretching my legs. The gas station was empty, the fluorescent lights flickering slightly. I went inside, nodding to the bored-looking attendant behind the counter, and grabbed another coffee. I took my time, hoping that whoever was behind me would be long gone by the time I got back on the road. After about 15 minutes, I headed back to my truck. The night seemed even quieter, the silence almost oppressive. I climbed into the cab and started the engine, pulling back onto the highway. For a while, everything was normal. The road was empty again, and I started to relax. Then, just as I was beginning to think the weirdness was over, I saw the headlights again. This time, they were much closer, almost right behind me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Enough was enough. I needed to find out who this was and what they wanted. I sped up, pushing the truck harder than I usually did. The headlights stayed with me, unrelenting. I scanned the road ahead, looking for a good spot to pull over and confront whoever was behind this. I saw a rest area sign and decided that was my best bet. I signaled and pulled into the rest area, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. The car followed me in, its headlights glaring in my mirror. I parked the truck and jumped out, ready to confront the driver. But as I walked towards the car, I noticed something strange. It was empty. The engine was running, the headlights on, but there was no one inside. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. How was this possible? I walked around the car, peering inside, but it was completely empty. No driver, no passengers. I backed away, my mind racing. Suddenly, the car's engine revved, and the headlights flickered. I stumbled back, watching in disbelief as the car started to move, turning to face the exit. It sped out of the rest area and back onto the highway, disappearing into the night. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The rest area was silent, the night air cold and still. I glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Gotcha!" But there was no one. Just me, my truck, and the memory of those haunting headlights. I climbed back into my truck, locking the doors behind me. I didn't know what I had encountered, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, my eyes constantly checking the mirrors for any sign of the car. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I finally reached Brenton and delivered the container, I was exhausted and on edge. As I parked the truck and climbed out, I glanced around one last time, half expecting to see those headlights lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the city waking up. I shook my head, trying to clear the lingering fear. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe there was something out there, something beyond explanation, that chose to haunt the lonely roads at night. Either way, I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't be driving this route again anytime soon. The drive had been peaceful, the kind of serene calm that only late-night roads can offer. My girlfriend, Emily, sat beside me, her head leaning back against the seat, her eyes half closed as she hummed along to the soft tunes playing on the radio. We had been on the road for hours, our spontaneous weekend getaway having taken us farther than planned. We decided to stop at a roadside diner that appeared out of nowhere, a beacon of neon in the inky darkness. The diner was quaint, almost charming in its rustic simplicity. We ordered some coffee and pie, relishing the warmth and comfort it provided against the chill of the night. The waiter, a middle-aged man with a graying beard and a tired smile, served us with practiced ease. As we were finishing up, I asked him if there was a quicker way to get back to the highway. "Oh, there's a shortcut," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "No traffic at this hour. You'll save at least an hour." Before I could respond, a murmur of voices arose from the few other patrons scattered around the diner. "Don't take the shortcut," an old woman croaked, her eyes wide with fear. "It's haunted." Another man, younger but equally serious, chimed in. "People who take that road don't come back the same, if they come back at all." Emily and I exchanged glances, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Haunted roads? It sounded like a bad campfire story. We thanked them for the warning but decided to take the shortcut anyway. As we left the diner, I noticed the patrons watching us with a mixture of pity and dread. The waiter gave a final, solemn nod as if sealing our fate. The shortcut began as an ordinary road, flanked by tall, swaying trees that cast long shadows in the moonlight. The air grew colder, and the night seemed to deepen, the darkness becoming almost tangible. Emily turned up the heater, shivering slightly. "Maybe we should have listened to them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's just a road. There's no such thing as ghosts." The road twisted and turned, narrowing as we ventured further. The trees seemed to close in, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but more road and trees. Suddenly, the radio cut out, replaced by static. Emily fiddled with the dials, but it remained stubbornly silent. A sense of unease settled in the car. "Did you hear that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. I listened intently, and there it was, a faint whispering, barely audible over the sound of the engine. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, an eerie chorus of voices blending into the night. "Probably just the wind," I said, though I wasn't convinced. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. I could almost make out words, though they made no sense. Emily's grip on my hand tightened, her nails digging into my skin. We rounded a bend, and the car's headlights fell on a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt. The figure was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, his face obscured by shadows. "Get back in the car!" Emily screamed, tried to focus on the road, but my mind was racing, every shadow a potential threat. Finally, we saw the lights of the highway ahead. The whispering faded, replaced by the familiar sounds of civilization. We pulled onto the highway, the terror of the shortcut behind us, but the memory of it lingering. As we drove, the radio crackled back to life, a news bulletin cutting through the static. Authorities are still investigating the disappearance of several travelers who were last seen taking an unmarked road near the old diner. If you have any information, please contact local authorities. Emily and I exchanged a look, the realization sinking in. We had survived the shortcut, but we were not the same. The whispering still echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the road we should never have taken. As the miles rolled by, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had left something behind on that dark, haunted road and taken something with us. Something that would never let us go.